but I'll go ahead and call us to order. So thanks for everybody for being here today. Per our agenda, we'll just kind of start with the approval of the minutes. And if I could just get everybody to take another moment if you haven't had a chance to review it. And I'll entertain a motion to either adopt or amend the minutes as presented.
I'll move for approval.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Franson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. The next action item we've got here is the invoice submitted by Ms. Armentrout. So again, if everybody could just take a look at that, and if it's agreeable, entertain a motion to approve.
Do we get a 10% discount for cash?
We'll have to negotiate that, Cheryl.
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. That brings us then to just committee and group reports. And of course, we have not had any formal subcommittee meetings over the last month, but I know our superintendents and their staffs have been working and talking about at least a few different items. So I'll leave it up to you all if there's any updates that you want to give the group, and then we can kind of go from there.
Sure, I think either one of us can speak to that. Very good. I love it. So in both the areas of HR and finance, those key functional areas, there's just a lot to be accomplished in this year and kind of a lead up to where we're headed. So it's been really great. We've had folks from both divisions and key positions together, plotted out a timeline of some tasks that we can make some changes to as necessary, which has been really nice. Figured out some small tasks that just need to get done, some large tasks that are going to take us some time. It feels like both those things are making headway. Now, both of those processes, they're pretty nuanced, and either one of us can speak to them with more detail. But it feels like good progress, is what I can tell you. And it's a lot of laying groundwork right now. Things that are really behind the scenes, pieces that we just need to establish for joint schools. That's been the bulk of our focus. So not very exciting, but good work.
Well, sometimes the necessary work isn't the most exciting.
But I have to applaud those groups. HR has a nice document like finance does. We had hoped to be able to submit it to you all today. It needs a little bit more fine tuning, but it's very, very thorough, and they have done a lot of work in two meetings. We were present at one, and they worked separately, Mrs. Lambert and Mr. Vaughn, but they've done a lot of good work to get us prepared to move forward with human resources. As far as finance, I know they're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work. I think there's actually a meeting with BRS on August the 11th to meet with those folks from Richmond. I don't know if it's a Zoom or an in-person.
I think someone is coming.
I think it is.
Correct.
Yeah. And then I think with the governance and policy, I think Mr. Jones, Dr. Jones has been back, but I can't speak to that.
Sure. And I appreciate you bringing that up. So Dr. Jones, who's just agreed to help us out from the University of Lynchburg, he's been in the office, I think this is day 3 that he's been here full time, just working with the policy manuals. He's generated a document comparing them in a lot of detail. That document, when I last talked to him, was about 25, 26 pages long. So it's been some pretty intense work he's generated for us. But it helps us spot key similarities, key differences a little more granular level than we had before. So again, I think that will probably flow from him, then probably to Melinda and I to work with the individual boards on, but that feels good to have headway on as well.
Good. Okay. Well, appreciate that update. And of course, we will probably sort of repeat this at the risk of putting you all in the spotlight maybe more than you would prefer, but as we go through these meetings monthly, I think we've settled into a rhythm there. We hope to hear as much progress as you can report to us. So I would like to bring up, just so we can kind of double down on something this group has already talked about early on, but in talking with Ms. Halterman and Ms. Snead-Johnson this morning, From an athletic standpoint, I think we might want to reaffirm some of the decisions that we've made previously. We had talked about with the naming of the high school, putting that out to the students. We had a fair amount of discussion about that at last month's meeting. The reaffirmations, if you will, might want to be the survey. We feel like, Ms. Halterman and Ms. Snead-Johnson feel like if we can get that out to the students by this fall, when they return to school and get that decided, that we will be in a good time frame in that regard. So the survey will go out to the students alone, not to the students and the community, not to the community, just to the students. And that's what we all had talked about before. I don't think there's any differing ideas on that at this point. Okay. And then sort of to that point, we expect, I think we had talked about as a committee, that once that poll is out to the students, the results are back, that's going to be what it is. I think that will be the deciding factor, not simply something that we bring back as a discussion point for further deliberation, but that the students will decide that once they have it. And we're all on the same page with that, Bert. I know you're a newcomer here, but I think just from being on the city school board and things, I think that's been something that you were aware of as part of the process. So that's sort of what we had talked about this morning, just briefly over email, was reaffirming those notions of how we're going to go about the process. Did I correctly encapsulate most of the questions there? I know those are the two big points that we wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I think it's from the school perspective, we wanted to make sure that we understood the target audience of the survey very, very clearly.
Right.
And then I think this is going to help the community to know
Right.
if the intention of this group is to use it as an input point or as a decision.
Right. Yeah. And I think from to that end, we can all remember, I mean, a community poll that was put out that eventually culminated in the Riverview option. That was part of what the community sort of participated in. So this final step will be the students of both divisions being able to step in and pick between the two. So just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page as far as that went. So. Any other questions or anything about that as far as work that's been done in the past month? Any other comments?
Are we going to give them a choice?
Yeah, what we talked about last month was, of course, we had fully developed the Riverview idea, the Riverview Ravens as was, and the color combination off the top of my head.
Navy and red, is that correct?
Unfortunately.
It was red and blue.
Red and blue, yes. Thank you all for your good opinion. Versus the Alleghany Cougars, and I think we had talked about a color palette of green and gold. I think has been what the discussion was to this point. So that was the idea, Gerald, is that we had two packaged options that the students would be able to choose from, something that they could better visualize as opposed to multi-step and a little bit more abstract ideas. So any other questions or comments there? Okay. I have here on the agenda, Ms. Onitis was unable to be with us today, and Mr. Dressler from Parks and Recreation was also unavailable to be here. So no one from the city is here to give any definitive update to this point, but basically I told Ms. Onitis I would just inform the group that the athletic venue assessments that we had talked about at various points, a facilities subcommittee talked about this a fair bit, and I know this body talked about it a good bit as well. Just having an outside set of eyeballs come in and take a look at Casey Field, Jackson River Sports Complex, those shared venues within the city, and just getting a fresh assessment on what could be done, what should be done, and then what our options would be in that regard. So what I can say today is that the wheels are turning in that regard. So Next month, though, I think we'll probably have a fair bit more information on either what has been discovered or maybe even some of the decisions that ultimately need to be made. And obviously, we'll try to make sure that we have as firm a handle on that, because it will impact the consolidation for sure.
Is that just the city facilities?
Yes, right now.
Because those two venues were chosen as the primary.
Yeah, and from the athletic and facilities subcommittee, particularly facilities sort of unanimously agreed that Casey Field would be the venue of choice as it would allow, principally for football and baseball. And then Jackson River Sports Complex was brought up to be utilized because CHS girls softball is played there. We've had some cross-country events there and things. So just kind of taking a look at what we could do to upgrade it, what we need to do possibly, that sort of thing, and having a fresh look at it. So that process is beginning, but I don't know that there's anything too much meat on that bone to report at this point. So any other questions or anything about that?
Now, you know that we're putting a bunch of money into track.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and as far as that goes, I know the facilities subcommittee had discussed just that idea that we had basically CHS's track at Burton Field is not the proper length, but from a surface standpoint was probably the better option if we would have had to have chosen today. But of course, Allegany's was the proper length, but the surface left something to be desired. So when's that supposed to be completed? I guess soon?
I don't know that we have a target completion date, but it's totally emotional. Like, we've decided to move forward on that.
Yeah. And I don't know, don't recall off the top of my head any real discussion about track and those as to which location will be the preferred host to that. So
that was because, like you said, the size and the condition was poor, but the size was right. And then, in case you got the opposite, but with it being at the high school location, it makes the track and field events easier to have there instead of coming back to Covington.
Yeah.
And physical fitness testing. I don't know if we thought about that, but that's 8th grade through 10th grade. Is that right?
Close in there, but often using the pacer now, so not necessarily required.
I didn't know if that was something that was still in high school or not. I know I wasn't very good at it, so.
Well, I know that we fixed the track, but we're trying to make the track so we can have regional events.
Right.
That's what we could host for regional events.
Yeah. And I think I know the athletic subcommittee had talked and facilities too about once we get to a consolidated division, I feel like the individual coaches of the individual sports will have a lot of input on some of these things. Now, obviously, if we have a newly resurfaced, proper length track, there's a lot of sense to be made to utilize that. But we've had questions before as to where will practices be held for, say, football, and I think the football coach and the staff would have a lot of input as to the day in and day out for that. So I think that will happen probably with other sports as well. So, any other questions, comments about the athletic venues?
Can I share one thing that came up? And I called you about it. And I talked to Mayor Sibold. When consolidating the school systems, it came to light yesterday, I guess, about the municipalities consolidating the rec leagues, because they're still in agreement about kids transferring back and forth. So that's something to look at that we probably ought to put back together.
Well, and I think as we discussed, I think it makes a lot of sense for from an recreational athletic standpoint in support of a consolidated division. I think it makes a lot of sense for us to come together in that regard as much as we can. I think we've had a lot of commonality in that Alleghany Youth Sports League, which is technically an independent organization, but they've sort of run as not city, not county, but an organization primarily for boys baseball, girls softball is what they kind of handle, but in conjunction with primarily working with the City Parks and Rec Department to schedule games, get field access, and that sort of thing. Working with the county too, I think with Altamont. I think that's the only county field that they've utilized to this point. I may be wrong. There may have been some Clifton Forge fields that they had utilized.
I think I don't disagree with Matt. I think it's something that the 2 rec departments and 2 local governments, I don't think this is the place to do that. We need to get it out there.
Yeah,
You're right.
Talk about help facilitate that for sure, if we get the right people.
But I think the 2 recreation departments are going to be the main players in that because they're the ones that have to agree on how they're going to do it. I know with Little League Baseball and Youth League Baseball, Clifton Forge wasn't wanting to give up their Little League program. Covington area was adamant that they were. So now we've got 2 baseball leagues in the area. And I don't know how that'll work out, but I think everything else will be easy.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, we don't have to get too far into the weeds to that, but there were a lot of pros and cons from the area youth baseball coaches. There was a lot of back and forth, I think, at the time when Covington made that decision as to the pros and cons of that. So I think there's room for maybe, not necessarily for the discussion to be had with this group necessarily, but for us to, just as Bert said, to help facilitate that as much as possible, because I think it would make sense from a sustainability standpoint, and also in support of the consolidated division.
Well, and you're building the community and getting them tighter together too.
And I apologize for diverting.
No.
With facilities and athletics, it kind of bled into.
I was just about to go to member comments and discussion anyway, so that fit perfectly there. No problem at all. Any other comments, discussion? That's pretty much the highlights. I wanted to give a chance for updates of any conversation over the last month.
You know, one of the things that we haven't talked about for a while, and I think we're probably at a point where it's going to be left up to the new school board and the school system, but the transportation link there. The last time the transportation committee met, we pretty much decided that we would like to use the program that Alleghany uses to schedule routes. We'd like to use Covington's plan as far as leasing buses instead of buying buses. And other than that, I don't know what else you need to do.
The only other thing was looking at the housing around the schools for the bus times and things. Other than that, you know, transportation wise, and we did talk about the option of either what buses were owned and what buses could be leased and maintenance agreements and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it was TransFinder. Is that TransFinder is what we had talked about, that the joint division would utilize TransFinder as far as to suss out bus routing and that sort of thing. So curious as to your all's input on that, as to how complicated, how complex, how far ahead do we necessarily, at the risk of making the creative board a little bigger, where do you think that may fall in, I guess, in planning timetable?
I think it falls in a lot of different places. I think the biggest concern for Alleghany at least would be, you know, we have our new transportation and maintenance supervisor, who's of course Eric, who gratefully comes to us from Covington. So he has a great knowledge of the region, and I think he'll help us make good decisions, but he's in about too.
Yeah.
So, you know, we just need to respect that piece of the timeline. That's my main piece. I think using TransFinder is probably not a problem at all. I don't know what your thoughts are.
We've never used it. We have a loop that we've used for years within the city limits, and I think what we already currently have in place would easily go into that system, or the 2 people that work on busing could get together in the near future and go ahead and start talking about the transportation piece, and that could be something that we could we've also talked about cafeterias and how we could join the cafeterias together, and there's an upcoming survey on what's it called, a survey, what am I trying to say?
We would have been due site monitoring.
Right, it's on-site monitoring, so we've talked about putting the 2 cafeteria managers together to ask the DOE if we could just do one on-site monitoring or give us a bypass into the new school divisions are actually in one place. So we're talking about the things that need to happen, but transportation, it would be easy to get the two groups together.
Yeah, and
Transportation.
correct me if I'm right, it feels like that would be something that really would have to be nailed down. I know it's kind of putting you all on the spot, but I don't know that that's something that we have to nail down definitively in the next 6 months. Certainly, I think Melinda's point about just having our two transportation directors get together and at least agree on here's the process, here's how long we think it will take, and this is when we may need to begin that process to ensure that we're ready to go on day one.
Well, and then even after day one, you're going to have routes change, times, and things of that nature too. So you're going to find out what the best practice is once you get into it or starting to do it. So as long as you can do your due diligence and make sure you have a good plan in place, you'll be able to make those adjustments, I think, after it starts being active.
And do we have a firmed up timeline for implementation of certain points at this right now?
For just overall?
Right, like this needs to be done.
Between what Mr. Witt kind of kick-started us with, and then thankfully Melinda and Kim have taken that and even expanded it to a certain degree. So I think, yes, that exists.
It does.
And we were talking before the meeting, it exists maybe even in several different forms as well. So I don't know. As far as a master list, comprehensive list, I don't know that we're there yet.
We've actually talked about what we call a Google Calendar and having all the events from human resources and curriculum and finance and whatever else on one major calendar and having that available, but that's not been started yet. It's just been talked about.
Okay. But yeah, I think I've been encouraged just in talking with Melinda and Kim over the last, especially even the last month or so, of developing some more comprehensive timetables. And I think even under the impression that even our finance folks have got together and even drilled it down even further than maybe even some of the things that I've seen. So pretty encouraging from that standpoint. Yep. So I think it's safe to say we maybe leave the transportation piece here, but it's safe to say that might be a somewhat low stress item at this point. So, but something definitely to put on the radar.
And then the one other committee we have pop up spotlight will be governance. Not sure that's pretty much
the biggest goal, I think, that the governance subcommittee that would have been the governance subcommittee's lap would have been the policy manual piece. And thankfully, we have wonderful help in that regard right now. So I think maybe Melinda, Kim, after some of the work that the professor is willing to do, maybe there's a point where we would convene the governance subcommittee to just kind of review some of that, touch base, that sort of thing.
I think that would be fine.
The end of August, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Dr. Jones is polishing up that document for us. He didn't give us an exact timeline, and it is long, right? So I want to be respectful of his time, because he's been working basically pro bono with us,
right,
which has been incredible.
Yeah.
But I would think at some point, at least towards the end of August, early September maybe at the outside. You think that's reasonable? Yeah.
Well, and to that point about his work, and please let him know how much we appreciate that. That's really very generous of him to kind of dive into that, because again, we've discussed about that is important but daunting work, and it's not something that very many people will raise their hand for, which I appreciate that.
It's been incredible to watch him work up through that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a question just for simplicity, like with the transportation subcommittee and maybe the government subcommittee. Are we at the point now where it would be simpler to basically reabsorb those back into this committee to make it easier and less?
I think that's a good point. I think depending on what everybody else feels about that, I think there would be room, especially if timing worked out, instead of having completely separate subcommittee meetings, there could be In case of, say, transportation, if our directors were able to get together, develop a little bit of a plan, timeline type thing, maybe have them, instead of a set meeting of transportation, maybe they can present that to this group at a meeting. Especially if we didn't have time constraints and things that really needed to be drilled down on. Is that kind of what you?
It's something that's already gone through basically a subcommittee meeting where administration now basically has to make the moving parts work.
Yeah.
And the subcommittees, it's kind of outside of that at this point. So I mean, it would probably be easier just to.
As far as I'm concerned, and love to hear what anybody else thinks, but I mean, if either of our superintendents feel like there's a particular issue that necessitates a subcommittee meeting, I say the word and we'll make that happen. If you all are comfortable just in your own bandwidth or just ability to assess the information and things, and you all feel more comfortable making recommendations, having consulted with those folks, I think I would be happy either way. Just depending.
I just didn't know if it would ease transparency or be faster, or where we're not bogging ourselves down with subcommittee meetings when it's really you all making the decisions or administration putting it together. We would just be kind of bogging down the process. So I didn't know if it would be simpler just to take care of it and do away with the subcommittee.
Well, I think to that point, I think right now we're just so thankful for the teamwork that exists. I mean, there's great teamwork, and a lot of the tasks we're tackling, they are not very shiny nor super interesting. They are very behind the scenes, detail oriented. How do we file this? How do we set this up? How do we pay for this? I mean, those kinds of things. And I'm sure people have lots of interest in those, and we certainly need to be transparent. They're just not very exciting for most people. Is that fair?
Yes. Where do we put all the records from Covington City Schools? Where do all of them go? Where they no longer exist? Those are the kind of the things that down deep work that has to be decided before July 1, 2022, and those are being discussed as we speak. And it's not, it's important work, but it's not something that everyone else wants to have to figure out. So, but it can be done. It will be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think to your point, to both of your points about transparency, I think there's a line that we have to toe that line between being efficient, not bogging the process down too much in bureaucracy and committee meetings and things. And I think there's a lot of work that our school professionals are best equipped to be doing to begin with. But if you all identify an area that either needs to be discussed on a broader level or just in the name of involvement of the public and community at large, again, let us say the word. Let us know, and we'll do our best to.
And I didn't mean to question any transparency. I was saying that it'd be easier and more for you all to have an issue talked about and on our subcommittee, then you've got to transfer it to the larger group, and so it'd probably be easier on some things, to just have it here instead of in a subcommittee.
Okay. All right.
As far as the governance, I think it's done all the governance except the policy. The professor taking care of it, and I think, and you say it would go to you.
It will, and I'm really excited about the depth of that reporting, because that's 20-some pages of good detail.
And do we really need to do governance?
I think at this point probably not, and then we can just lean on the work that Dr. Jones will be completing at some point, and then just kind of go from there. We need to convene that subcommittee to take a look at recommendations, that sort of thing, or if it's something that can simply be brought to the entire committee.
I think school board appointments and school board operation and voting, we had agreed at one point 3 from Covington, 4 from Alleghany County. We thought we would be able to transition them out of the existing boards, but we actually need to reappoint new people, but they can be people on existing boards. But there will have to be a process to apply for those positions.
Right, and the memo that the governance subcommittee released, as I recall, was worded something along the lines of basically the composition of the new school board could be, and obviously it's at the pleasure of each governing body, but it could be from members currently serving, because At the time, we had a natural, it just happened that way, we had a natural expiration of 5 area school board terms. So what we said was an option for both the city and the county to reappoint would be to reappoint those seats that would have been naturally going on into the future. Mr. Baker and I had that conversation a lot because our terms would technically be expiring on July 1st of 2022. But I think to your point, technically you must go back through the exact same process. It's not anything that we can automatically redo. That was just sort of the governance subcommittee's.
But you also have to keep in mind, are you going to stagger those terms?
They're going to have to be staggered.
Or are you going to, because we talked about the referendum, elected school board, so, and how would those be staggered? So those are things we got to.
The law actually prescribes how they're staggered, and I don't recall it off the top of my head. It is in the subcommittee memo. If you're appointing 4 members, this is the term length. If 3, if 2, if 1, that sort of thing. So it will be a sort of. To be honest with you, I'm not sure when you're making, say, 4 and 3 appointments at the same time. I'm not sure how you decide whose term will be for what length, but it does. The law does.
Well, if you have a board member from either board who overlaps that date, I would think you would possibly confirm, reconfirm, or extend their appointment, right? And then their expiration date would still be that same as it would have been had nothing been going on.
And that's what we talked about in the past.
And then somebody who was coming off, if they wanted to be reappointed, would then have that 2, 3, whatever year term it is at that point. So you would extend an individual and then reappoint individuals. Based on.
Well, yes, that was part of our discovery with what the law says and the creation of a new school board. We kind of thought, the governance subcommittee kind of thought we had a little bit more of a blank slate than we actually did. The law is fairly specific when it comes to, it actually, thankfully, it naturally staggers the terms. Because one of the things the governance subcommittee had feared and was going to try to avoid is potential complete board turnover. The loss of the continuity there, I think, should be avoided where we can.
Were they in, that's what I was going to say, it wasn't 3 consecutive years, right? Was it?
2 and 1.
That's what I was trying to think.
I could be wrong, but I think when you're doing a new board, it may have prescribed eventually each term was 4 years, but that may have been 3. It was either 3 or 4. I'd have to go back and double check. But again, if you were appointing a certain number, one appointment was for, say, 4 years. The second appointment was for 3.
That's what I get. That's it's staggered. Yeah.
Okay.
One more thing on government. We, in the document we presented to the Department of Education, we had come up with a plan to have a super majority vote on certain items.
Right.
And it was hiring a superintendent, closing a school.
Well, I think it read the hiring or termination of superintendent had to have a super majority, and then the building or closure of a facility had to have a super.
So are we okay with that still being in place? I don't know. I haven't heard anything different, but I hadn't heard anything at all. It seemed like it was okay with the Department of Education.
Yeah.
I guess they didn't say no.
It was stamped off when it was approved.
I think as far as that goes from a board standpoint, I think most of DOE or really any other concerned state level agency, I think their attitude seemed to be if we're comfortable with it, they're comfortable with it. Because to Tom's point, we didn't hear any pushback really against that. So I think as far as I have not heard anyone really express any discontent with that now.
I just didn't want to get into the middle of things and all of a sudden that's not working anymore.
Right.
And to Bert's point about the referendum with the elected board, for that to have been on this November's election, it would have had to have been the petition had to have been presented the second Tuesday in June behind us.
Right.
So the next opportunity to put an elected school board on referendum would be next June. And that's plenty of time to get the petitions together. You don't really have to start gathering until January, but you got to have them in by June. And I think everybody has always been pretty much in favor of having an elected school board. It's just never, nobody's ever went to the trouble of putting petitions together and trying to get a referendum on the ballot.
But I think that the first iteration of the combined school board needs to be those appointed individuals. And I think that we can move towards that elected board.
But somebody has to champion that cause. Somebody's got to get out there. It's got to be citizen initiated. They've got to get out there and start collecting petitions. And so many signatures from Covington, so many signatures from Alleghany County. It's somebody's interested in doing that. They're
You
going
end
to
up
start
having a
doing it.
mix of elected individuals and appointed individuals for X number of years until they're all elected.
Yeah.
And I think the way the memo read that an effort would be made, so it sort of covered that in at least some terms.
Usually when elected school boards pop up, when that discussion pops up, it's always at the wrong time of year. You know, it's too late now. Well, we haven't had elected school. Well, you got to. You got to start a year ahead of time. You can't do it just because you want to.
One other thing to consider is the life cycle of this board should probably continue either 1 year past the elected school board, maybe, to think about, or at least as a sounding board. I don't know, we may look at that. We never set a term or an ending date, how long this board would stay viable.
I think especially as it relates to, if you go back to the joint funding agreement that we went over last month, we formally recommended to board supervisors and city council that be looked at and adopted. That has specific language in it that necessitates a certain amount of leadership meetings and things specifically relating to the budget. So if we feel like we need to extend this committee's life just for in the spirit of communication with all parties involved, I don't know that I'd be opposed to that at all.
We don't have a cutoff date.
Yeah,
And it seems like to me the way we're going now is going to be a natural progression to where this committee's not needed anymore.
right. Yeah.
Would be available until not needed, maybe, something like that.
You all feel comfortable telling us when we're not needed anymore?
But I just figure as the new board comes together, there'll be a need, you know, to go back and answer questions.
It's a good idea.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay.
When we originally started, we pretty much agreed that we would just do outlines, right? We wouldn't get in the weeds, because we would leave that to the people, you know, who cut some weeds every day.
I think we coined the term last week. I think we started calling those folks the grasshoppers because we started talking about getting down into the weeds. I think we can credit Mr. Rice for that term, the grasshoppers. No, I think that you're exactly right, Gerald. And I know I have always intended that once we got to a certain point that we would let the professionals do what they know how to do best. So thankfully we've got some good professionals. So again, I know we've said it a lot. I've told Melinda and you too as well, but we sincerely appreciate the work you guys have been doing. I know it's not going to be easy, as we talked about. There will be some stressful points. We're going to be pulling off some sort of new and novel things, or at least new to us, even new to someone like Melinda, who has had a lot of experience in a lot of different things. So, but again, whether it's bits of information you all bring back or come upon from some of the folks in either division, I think we are transitioning to a point where this committee's job is to support and facilitate you all in whatever way needs to be done. So,
I appreciate that, absolutely.
any other comments? I only have one piece of business, just kind of scheduling our next meeting. We have been sort of, the last couple have been the last Wednesday in each month, but am I correct? And Gerald and I talked about this, I should know the answer because I should have memorized the schedule. August 25th is our first day of school. Which is, yes, which is the last Wednesday in August. So I'm assuming you ladies would like to stay away from that
That would
day?
probably be wise.
If everybody, if I'm comfortable switching to another day in that week, or maybe we could kick it to the following Wednesday if we wanted to keep Wednesdays as a meeting time. Thoughts, anybody?
Everybody here, you know.
Well, and I was thinking too, the timing of it, we have had a summertime schedule here the last couple meetings, but I know workday versus evening meetings, there's pros and cons to those, but I think Mr. Tucker's point is valid. We probably will have to transition to evening meetings again. That's kind of how we started, so.
Yeah, last 3 o'clock meeting Tuesday, 24th.
Would Tuesday, August 24th at 3 p.m., does that seem like, would that be comfortable?
We can make it work.
Yeah.
We can make it work. Yeah, we'd be okay.
Okay. All right, well, if you all will, yeah, and I think maybe we can try to settle in at least, at 3 p.m. Tuesday, August 24th at 3 p.m. And I'll try to reach out to Mr. Huber to see if the county building will be available. If not, we'll talk to Ms. Onitis and see if we can't come back here. 3 o'clock, yeah. I think maybe we can squeeze one more workday meeting in before we go into evening. So, but with nothing else on the agenda, no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So, Mr. Witt have anything?
He didn't chime in, Mr. Witt. We don't want to not include you. Did you have any comments or anything before we close?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Jonathan, did you say something to me?
Yes, sir. Did you have any comments for us before we close? I know you may have been a little out of
I'm
the
sad
loop.
to say that the audio was pretty much jumbled all day for me on the meeting. I picked up maybe half of what you said or less, and so they haven't quite perfected the Zoom into the large meeting technology. And so we'll talk on the telephone,
Okay.
and you can bring me up to whatever speed you need. And I'm sorry, but I just stuck around to see if I could pick up a tidbit or two, but pretty much I couldn't understand what folks were saying today. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay, and not sure if you can hear me now. I know city's been doing some renovating here in City Hall, and the gentleman that they tasked with, we knew there were going to be limitations for Zoom today. So sorry about that, Mr. Witt. But without anything further, I think we had a motion.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all very much, and we will see you on the 24th.